Hello, my name's Dave Emory, and this is Side 1 of For the Record program number 524, titled The Safari Club and the Islamic Bomb. This is being recorded on August 28th of the year 2005. We're once again going to be accessing information from a very important new book about the intelligence community. This book gets the Dave Emory 5-star rating, so to speak, and I can't encourage listeners strongly enough to go out and get a hold of it. By the way, I don't get any money from this. The book is called Prelude to Terror, authored by Joseph J. Trento. It's just out in hardcover, copyrighted by Joseph Trento, but published by Carolyn Graff. We talked about the Safari Club in For the Record 522. Going to review very quickly a couple of aspects of what the Safari Club is, because what we're going to be taking a look at is how the Safari Club, basically an outsourcing of key U.S. intelligence functions to a privatized network financed by, in large measure, and conducted in conjunction with not only Saudi intelligence but Pakistani intelligence, how this led directly to the formation of the Islamic bomb. In the run-up to the Iraq War in the early 2 years of this century, we were told by Condi Rice that we had to make sure that we did this so there wouldn't be a mushroom cloud. The smoking gun shouldn't be a mushroom cloud. Well, one of the things that Condi Rice did not tell us, not surprisingly, was that the Islamic bomb, the Islamic nuclear capability, which may ultimately come back to haunt us in a devastating way, was a direct outgrowth of intelligence policies pursued by the current seated president's father and Ronald Reagan and the intelligence milieu of which they were a part. During the closing years of the Carter administration, they were complicit with this as well, but the fact of the matter is that the mushroom cloud that may at some point form over an American city, courtesy of Islamic nuclear terror, is a direct outgrowth of the policies of both George's Bush and of the Safari Club. Now, reviewing very quickly what the Safari Club is. First of all, we're going to read from the introduction to Prelude to Terror. This material was in For the Record 522, but I'm presenting it here by way of review for the listeners who have not, review and for also by way of introduction for listeners who were not tuned in to For the Record 522. Prelude to Terror will focus on how the privatization of intelligence metamorphosed from an instrument of limited application in the 1950s into a broad-based core operating model of significant proportions in the 1970s and 80s. Simultaneously, a secret alliance was forged with Saudi intelligence. This alliance was orchestrated by CIA covert management without the knowledge of Congress and, in some cases, even the President. Ultimately, as these two developments became increasingly intertwined, a dynamic of catastrophic proportions was created, one that left the United States with a severely compromised intelligence apparatus in the Middle East. By the way, I would note here that the relationship here that we're seeing in the intelligence community is directly reflective of and an outgrowth of economic relationships which cemented not only the Bush family but also elements of the Texas and right-wing Republican power elite with the Saudis, reactionary views on a number of things, and the all business, as they call it in Texas, being the cementing elements. Now, what the Safari Club is described by Joe Trento. The Prince Turki here and Sheikh Kamal Adem were two chiefs of Saudi intelligence. Prince Turki was the fellow who ran Osama bin Laden throughout the 80s and most of the 90s. Prince Turki resigned from his position as Saudi intelligence chief after more than 2 decades, about a week and a half before September 11th took place. Prince Turki, the main fellow in the Saudi end of the Safari Club, is now the Saudi ambassador to the United States. Isn't that special? Of the Safari Club, Joe Trento writes, both Prince Turki and Sheikh Kamal Adem would play enormous roles in servicing a spy network designed to replace the official CIA while it was under congressional scrutiny between the time of Watergate and at the end of the Carter administration. The idea of using the Saudi royal family to bypass the American Constitution did not originate in the kingdom. Adem was initially approached by one of the most respected and powerful men in Washington, Clark Clifford, who rose to power under Harry Truman and had enjoyed a relationship with the intelligence community for years. Quote, Clark Clifford approached Kamal Adem and asked that the Saudis consider setting up an informal intelligence network outside the United States during the investigations, Robert Crowley said. Crowley, in his role as the CIA's liaison to the corporate world, was privy to the plan, in which worldwide covert operations for the agency were funded through a host of Saudi banking and charity enterprises. Several top U.S. military and intelligence officials directed these operations from positions they held overseas, notably former CIA Director Richard Helms, at this time ambassador to Iran. Ed Wilson and his associates supported the network. According to Wilson, Prince Turki was used to finance several of his intelligence operations during this time period. According to Wilson, the amounts were in the millions of dollars. According to Tom Kleins, the relationship between the Saudis and the private U.S. intelligence network that grew out of the activities of Kleins and his colleagues was, quote, vital. These operations were so sensitive they could not be revealed, unquote. Mike Pilgrim, who also played a role in the operations of the private network during the 1980s, said, quote, it got to the point where we were used to support GID, parenthetically Saudi intelligence operations, when the CIA could not. According to those involved, there was no line drawn between what was official and what became personal business. Now, this network was formed when the elder George Bush was director of the CIA. It was the main intelligence element involved with the Iraqgate and Iran-Contra machinations, and also the support for the Afghan Mujahideen. And as we've seen in many past broadcasts, the elder George Bush, when he was vice president of the United States, presided over those covert operations through his own private intelligence network that grew out of the Vice President's Task Force on Combating Terrorism. As we've seen, one of the things that grew out of the Safari Club was the Saudi ability to spy on the United States. Skipping down again and speaking of Prince Turki, Turki's secret was that the Saudi royal family had taken over intelligence funding for the United States. It was during this period that the Saudis opened up a series of covert accounts at Riggs Bank in Washington. Starting in the mid-'70s, bank investigators say these accounts show that tens of millions of dollars were being transferred between CIA operational accounts and accounts controlled by Saudi companies and the Saudi embassy itself. And again, it's made very clear that one of the things the Saudis were interested in doing and did do was to spy on U.S. intelligence. This network was the primary element involved in the Afghan Mujahideen support effort, again, at the direction of the elder George Bush, and ultimately the compromising of U.S. intelligence by this network could not be exaggerated. The transfer of technology that we're about to see, the ultimate compromising of the United States with regard to nuclear matters, was anticipated by a stunning transfer of keyword software technology that had been developed by the National Security Agency. Speaking of the damage done by the Safari Club and the outsourcing of U.S. intelligence to a large extent to Saudi Arabia, to make matters worse, the CIA official continued, the CIA permitted U.S. Customs at Dulles Airport to overlook an illegal export of our most secret eavesdropping software to Saudi Arabia, unquote. The software, referred to as keyword software, is a computer code developed for the National Security Agency by a company called E-Systems. The software allows keywords and phrases to be flagged by computers from targeted voice and other communications in real time. The problem with exporting the software is that any country getting it could use it to target U.S. interests and allies. It could even be used to track what U.S. law enforcement, military, and intelligence agencies were doing. Parenthetically, consider the implications of this for some of the things that went wrong on September 11th, bearing in mind that large elements of Saudi intelligence were sympathetic to Osama bin Laden. Louis Sams, the man E-Systems ordered to deliver the software to the kingdom, said, "I was very nervous when I got to the airport. I knew it was illegal to take it out of the country, but I was given the name of a customs official at Dulles Airport and told if there were any problems to ask for him. E-Systems' desire to do business with the royal family was why I thought they sent me," unquote. Sam said that E-Systems, which had close ties to the White House, maintained the secret communications gear for Air Force One. As it turned out, E-Systems did not get the contract for Saudi intelligence, but the software was left with GID officials. Even so, according to SAMS. And that stunning technology transfer, basically, by what I have referred to so many times as a fifth column, actively subverting the United States, that transfer pales beside the transfer of nuclear technology, which was part of an outgrowth of the Safari Club, and in particular was a quid pro quo engaged in by the Safari Club related of U.S. intelligence and the Reagan and Bush administrations for the Saudi and Pakistani participation against the Soviets in the Afghan war and the Saudi and ISI Pakistani intelligence support for the Mujahideen. So again, as we contemplate a grim future and as we look back in anger, as well we should, at Condi Rice's warnings about a mushroom cloud, hopefully the smoking gun won't be a mushroom cloud, said the redoubtable Ms. Rice. Well, just bear in mind when that happens, which it probably will at some point, just remember where that technology came from and who presided over its transfer. We're now going to take a look at the Safari Club and the Kleins, Shackley, Ed Wilson network's participation in the Afghan Mujahideen support effort. Bear in mind, at this point, Ed Wilson had been shoved out of the operation, but that network was very much in place. It was involved with the Iran-Contra affair and with the Afghan Mujahideen support effort. Of the Safari Club and the development of the Islamic bomb, we read, once again, from Joseph J. Trento's excellent Prelude to Terror, the same leadership that promulgated the Safari Club, the Saudi royals, also strongly funded and supported the Islamic Development Bank. Begun in 1973, the IDB now has 55 member states, with Saudi Arabia dominating, with 27.33% of the bank's funding. As a comparison, Egypt contributes only 9.48% and Pakistan just 3.41% of the bank's total capital. It was through the bank's scientific and economic development efforts that huge amounts were funneled into Pakistan, which ended up in the hands of A.Q. Khan and his now infamous nuclear bomb-building syndicate. There's been a lot written about the A.Q. Khan network. The A.Q. Khan network developed out of the machinations of the Safari Club. Continuing. The effort that began prior to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and that President Carter's National Security Advisor warned was a serious effort to build the first Islamic bomb was deliberately ignored by Carter in order to secure Saudi and Pakistani cooperation for the anti-Soviet effort in Afghanistan. Like almost everything about the anti-Soviet effort, the Reagan administration expanded on it, and the CIA directly assisted the Pakistani nuclear effort by allowing Pakistani nationals to procure hardware for the program in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. By the way, toward the end of this passage, on the other side, we're going to take a look at a network run by a fellow named Nazir Ahmed Vaid, who was certainly involved with the A.Q. Khan network, may very well have been a CIA and U.S. intelligence asset of some sort attached to the Safari Club, but he was gallivanting back and forth into the United States after September 11th. And in, among other programs for the Record 500, we've taken a look at very concrete indications that elements of Pakistani intelligence actively supported September 11th. Continuing, quote, "There was nothing more important than propping up a free Afghanistan. One of the things I did was to try to get the Afghan king, then living in exile in Italy, to come back to Afghanistan so we could build a new government," Thomas Kleins recalled. Although he was out of the CIA and now officially retired, quote, "I was trying to do my part in keeping Afghanistan in our column. Shackley was working with the royal families in the Gulf. All were contributing to the effort in the early 1980s, unquote. Kleins conceded that the off-the-books intelligence operations had been melded into the Afghan war effort. Quote, "We worked for who was helping the United States the most. The Saudis worked very closely with us," unquote. Kleins recalled how Bernard Houghton, who had run Nugan Hand Bank in Saudi Arabia until it ran out of money, played a key role working with Prince Turki and the Saudi GID. Again, GID, Saudi intelligence, Prince Turki, the chief of same, Prince Turki, the man who ran Osama bin Laden. Continuing, "What many people do not know was that the Safari Club had made a deal with Pakistan at the expense of the Afghan people. The Safari Club was run by the Saudis. It was a club to serve their purposes through the CIA. Shackley and Wilson were not members, only nations could belong. Shackley and Wilson were men who served the club in exchange for power, influence, and money. Pakistani intelligence would handle all the money going to facilitate the proxy war against the Soviets. That meant that hundreds of millions of dollars from the United States and Saudi Arabia were being run through Pakistan with no accountability. Unfortunately, unquote, said Robert Crowley, again quoting, the Pakistanis knew exactly where their cut of the money was to go, unquote. Where the money went was into an Islamic nuclear weapons program supported by Saudi Arabia and accepted by the United States. During the early 1990s, British Customs began looking closely at the United States-Pakistani nuclear network. One of their top agents was an Arabic-speaking Muslim who traveled the world tracking down A.Q. Khan's network. The British soon learned that the United States had no interest in shutting down the network, which had been operating for years. Parenthetically, we're talking here about the early 1990s. The Soviet Union doesn't even exist at this point, so keep that in mind. The British soon learned that the United States had no interest in shutting down the network, which had been operating for years. The Muslim customs agent, whose identity must be protected for his own safety, was actually confronted by Khan in Dubai, where the agent had traced a number of Khan's front companies. The agent testified in a trial involving associates of Khan's that the father of the Pakistani bomb confronted the Muslim customs agent and called him, quote, a traitor to the Muslim people, unquote, for uncovering the nuclear network that was supplying weapons equipment to Libya, Iran, Malaysia, and North Korea. A top French intelligence official who asked that his name be withheld from publication described the U.S.-Pakistani cover-up of the Khan network as having, quote, an important precedent. Just as the U.S. allowed Israel to develop nuclear weapons under pressure from the Saudis, the U.S. allowed Pakistan to be Saudi Arabia's proxy as the first Islamic nuclear state. The Saudis put up the cash and have clean hands as Pakistan builds the bomb for its supposed defense against India over Kashmir, but my country and the British received no cooperation starting in the 1980s when we discovered traces of Khan's network. The U.S. did not want to discuss it, unquote. A senior source in the British government who asks not to be named confirms that Khan ran the network and that parts for the nuclear weapons program came from the United States. Khan's daughter, attending school in England, was being tutored, and at the end of faxes dealing with logistics for her education, Khan would sometimes write, in his own hand, items he needed for the nuclear program. We're going to be talking about the various networks involved in this nuclear program. Note that the BCCI, which we've spoken about so many times, was used for much of the machinations for the A.Q. Khan network, and as we'll see, that was covered up by the Bush administration, that is, the elder George Bush administration. Note that the BCCI's role in helping to develop Pakistan's Islamic bomb, unquote, was revealed by the person who conducted the congressional investigation into the BCCI. That was a fellow by the name of John Kerry. Some people may have heard of him. Continuing. Pakistan's quest for nuclear weapons had begun some 15 years earlier. Shortly after taking office in 1972, Pakistani Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto expressed his determination to develop a nuclear capability. His purpose was twofold: to offset the inherent threat posed by Pakistan's much larger neighbor and avowed enemy India, and to make his country a leader of the Islamic world. After India detonated its first atomic weapon on the Pakistani border in 1974, Bhutto pushed his nuclear program into high gear. To lead the effort, he tapped Abdul Qadir Khan, an accomplished metallurgist and businessman with a strong desire for wealth. To finance his ambitious program, Bhutto turned to his country's oil-rich ally, Saudi Arabia, and to Libya. China also pledged assistance. By 1976, when George Bush served as CIA director, U.S. intelligence estimates reported in a secret CIA report on Pakistan that Pakistan was engaged in, quote, a crash program to develop nuclear weapons, unquote. In 1979, while awaiting execution following his overthrow, Bhutto wrote in his memoirs that his goal as prime minister had been to put the Islamic civilization, unquote, on an even footing with, quote, Christian, Jewish, and Hindu civilizations, unquote, by creating a, quote, full nuclear capability, unquote, for the Islamic world. The man who overthrew Bhutto, General Muhammad Zia al-Haq, carried on that effort. In April of 1979, when President Zia refused to halt work on the Islamic bomb, President Jimmy Carter cut off American economic and military aid to Pakistan. Just 8 months later, however, following the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan, Carter struck the ultimate Faustian bargain in order to win Zia's approval for using Pakistan as a base of operations for the Mujahideen. Zia's fortunes further improved following the 1980 election of Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. With the covert U.S. war in Afghanistan intensifying, the Pakistani dictator gained significant advantage, and he used it. In addition to winning large economic and military aid packages for his country, he extracted a promise from the Reagan-Bush administration that there would be no U.S. interference in Pakistan's internal affairs, unquote. That meant no complaints about Zia's dictatorial rule and no obstruction of his efforts to build an Islamic bomb. To keep up appearances, Zia publicly maintained that he was not developing nuclear weapons. However, in 1983, a secret State Department briefing memo revealed that there was, quote, unambiguous evidence, unquote, that Pakistan was, quote, actively pursuing a nuclear weapons development program, unquote, and that China was providing technological assistance. At the time, U.S. law prohibited providing assistance to any country that was importing certain nuclear weapons technology. The Reagan-Bush administration simply ignored the legislation, arguing that cutting off aid to Pakistan would harm U.S. national interests. Throughout the 1980s, Congressman Charlie Wilson, the former Ed Wilson associate acting in concert with the CIA, repeatedly blocked congressional efforts to halt American funding of Pakistan in order to protect a key ally in the covert Afghan war. Wilson, by the way, that's Charlie Wilson, a congressman from Texas, Wilson went so far as to tell Zia, quote, Mr. President, as far as I'm concerned, you can make all the bombs you want, unquote. Zia privately assured the congressman that Pakistan's nuclear program was peaceful and that it would never build a delivery system. Quote, the truth was the Americans had little choice, Salahuddin said. By the way, I should interject here. Dawood Salahuddin, the former David Belfield, was an African-American Muslim who not only converted to Islam but fell under the sway of Sayyid Ramadan of the Muslim Brotherhood. He committed a key assassination of a former Iranian official under the Shah in Washington, D.C., then fled abroad, was given shelter first in Iran. Eventually, Salahuddin did become one of the freedom fighters in Afghanistan and had a fair amount to reveal subsequently to Joseph J. Trento about some of the clandestine activities that were attendant upon the Afghan Mujahideen support effort. Beginning again. Zia privately assured the congressman that Pakistan's nuclear program was peaceful and that it would never build a delivery system. Quote, the truth was the Americans had little choice, unquote, Salahuddin said. Zia was worshipped by the Mujahideen. He was the only foreign leader who attracted universal admiration amongst them, even though they were well aware that his ISI, inter-service intelligence guys, were taking what the Afghans figured was a 60% cut on all that was being sent to them. None of that took any glow off Zia's halo. He was the only one to open his country to the Afghan resistance, allowed training camps, and there were always more Afghan refugees in Pakistan than in Iran. The Iranians did nothing of the sort or the scale in the military sphere. The guy was almost saint-like for the resistance, unquote. Zia continued to deceive the United States about his nuclear weapons ambitions. In the mid-1980s, he flatly told the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Vernon Walters, that Pakistan was not building a bomb. When senior State Department officials later confronted him about the misrepresentation, Zia told them, quote, it is permissible to lie for Islam, unquote. He eventually gave up the pretense, telling Time magazine in 1987 that, quote, Pakistan has the capability of building the bomb, unquote. And we are going to continue with our story of how the Safari Club and the various individuals and elements attended upon it, including the Reagan and Bush administrations, Prince Turki, who ran Osama bin Laden and was arguably the point man for the Safari Club. We're going to look at the BCCI's role in funding the Islamic bomb. However, we're going to do that in Side 2. For the benefit of listeners who only listen on the radio, directed at those listeners, I can't encourage you strongly enough to supplement your listening efforts by going to the Internet and accessing a vast array and a growing array of information. In the first place, I turn each For the Record program into a long, article-length, written description featuring the text made available for fair use. This type of broadcasting, the type I've been using for so many years now, is admittedly very, very pedantic, and so if some of this goes by you, that's altogether to be expected. Please go to the Internet and access the printed descriptions. Even if you're not online yourself, you can go to your local library and get them printed up either for free or for a very, very modest sum, or perhaps rely on some friends who have Internet access for that. Note also that an enterprising listener back east has been turning the descriptions, in turn, into a blog. So there's now a For the Record blog sphere as well. The same for the RFA archive programs. Heroic sister station WFMU-FM has been archiving the For the Record programs. The entire For the Record series is available on Real Audio, or in some cases on MP3 as well. You can access the last couple of hundred or so, really more than that, almost about 250 plus shows on Real Audio, streaming at www.wfmufm.org/Dave Emory, one word DAVEEMORY, and older shows are available for download only on a longer URL. Link to both that and to the For the Record section of the Spitfire website at www.spitfirelist.com. WFMU is now podcasting the For the Record shows, and on the Spitfire website, that is the website of the CD duplication service that stocks all of the work that I've done, there is again a vast array of audio and printed information. In addition to the For the Record descriptions and descriptions of other shows, there are lectures available, 2 very important lectures about the future. The For the Record series is available for several weeks after I recorded the programs, and the Spitfire website features the remarkable and suppressed text by Paul Manning, Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile, on both PDF and on HTML. There's also a link to a website maintained by listeners in the Midwest that feature the declassified government documents proving the Bush family's involvement with Nazi industry before, during, and most importantly, after World War II. There's a search function on the Spitfire website, and also there is a page to click on to support the work that I'm doing. And if you don't like what you're seeing here, there could be no better way of supporting and fighting against that than no better way of fighting against that than supporting the work that I'm doing. This concludes Side 1 of For the Record program number 524, The Safari Club and the Islamic Bomb. This is being recorded on August 28th of the year 2005. My name's Dave Emory. Thanks for listening. Hello, my name's Dave Emory, and this is Side 2 of For the Record program number 524, titled The Safari Club and the Islamic Bomb. This is being recorded on August 28th of the year 2005. Now, we're going to continue with our account of how the Islamic bomb, and specifically the Pakistani AQ Khan network, which has been quite a bit in the news media over the last couple of years, although not as much about that network has been in the media as should have been. We're going to take a look at how basically the Safari Club, an outsourcing of U.S. intelligence to Saudi Arabia, was ultimately responsible for the development of the AQ Khan network and the Islamic bomb. It is apparent already from what we've seen that the AQ-Con network was allowed to proceed forward in exchange for the Saudi GID, that's the Saudi Intelligence Service, the Pakistani ISI, and their agreement to work as proxies for the CIA in helping to support the Afghan Mujahideen. As we saw in For the Record 522, and as we reviewed briefly at the beginning of this program, the official rationale for the establishment of the Safari Club was to give U.S. intelligence a plausibly deniable and unverifiable operational capability during the congressional investigations of the mid-1970s. I suspect that the investigation that most disturbed the authors of the Safari Club was the House Select Committee on Assassinations investigating the Kennedy assassination, the John Kennedy assassination, that is, and the assassination of Martin Luther King. But the official rationale was because of the relatively tame Church Committee. I suspect that there were other motivations for the establishment of the Safari Club, including a decision that I think was made among the world's power elites and elements associated with the Underground Reich to basically farm out what was left of American democracy and to pretty much reduce the United States to what it is now, a name and a series of properties being bought out and utilized and eventually liquidated by foreign interests. Recall that at the root of the Reagan administration, at the root of both Georges Bush, and at the root of the Safari Club and Saudi Arabia, lies the Third Reich and its post-war underground mafia-like component, what I call the Underground Reich, the greatest concentration of economic power under a single control in world history, as a banker told the late Paul Manning, author of Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile, a text available for free on the Spitfire website. Now, we're going to return for our account of how the Safari Club and those elements of U.S. intelligence that were working with it, basically the Reagan and Bush administrations and really both Bush administrations, because it appears basically that George W. Bush is picking up the residua of the Safari Club and working with it. We're going to take a look at how the Safari Club and its participation in the Afghan Mujahideen support effort against the Soviets in the 1980s, which of course spawned Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. We're going to take a look at how that also spawned the AQ-Con network and the Islamic bomb, continuing with the tale that we began. We're going to turn once again to Prelude to Terror, subtitled The Rogue CI and the Legacy of America's Private Intelligence Network. That was authored by Joseph J. Trento, published in hardcover by Carolyn Graff. We resume with our narrative. By the way, this is a book I can't recommend strongly enough. We resume with our narrative. By 1985, the Saudi royal family had succeeded in drawing the United States into an Islamic morass. Over the years, the Wahhabi sect, a radical form of anti-Western Islam, had increasingly caused the high-living royal family political problems at home. To deal with this, the royal family gave the Wahhabi leaders free rein and paid lip services to their diatribes against the West and Israel. But after the fall of the Peacock Throne in Iran, religious division surfaced within the royal family, contributing to a schizophrenia in Saudi Arabia's foreign policy. With one hand, the Saudis supported the secular Saddam Hussein against the Islamic regime in Iran, and with the other they dispatched Osama bin Laden and others as members of the Saudi intelligence to work with the most radical Islamic elements fighting to secure control of Afghanistan. The anti-communist Reagan-Bush policymakers focused only on the goal of weakening the Soviet Union, ignoring the threat of radical Islam. The efforts by the Saudis, Reagan, Casey, and Bush to destabilize the Soviet Union through the war in Afghanistan carried a huge price in terms of both money and the number of Afghan lives lost. Hundreds of millions of dollars poured into Pakistani intelligence from the United States, with almost no control on how the funds were spent. The same BCCI bank accounts being used to fund the Afghan resistance were also used to fund the Pakistani nuclear bomb program, according to a Senate report on BCCI. The Reagan-Bush policy violated both American law and international non-proliferation treaties. But this type of violation was not unprecedented. The United States had allowed covert aid to Israel to help with their nuclear weapons program in the late 1950s and early 1960s. In 1964, Lyndon Johnson had given James Angleton permission to assist Israel in further developing its nuclear weapons program. Now, the Reagan administration was leveling the playing field. The Saudis claimed that Israel had directly aided India in developing its program and had thus created a dangerous imbalance in the region. Allowing Pakistan to develop a weapon but not to deploy it seemed like a workable compromise, and the Saudis argued the only solution. The 1979 memo from Zbigniew Brzezinski to President Carter, suggesting how the Soviet Union could be trapped in Afghanistan, had warned that the price of luring the Soviets might include abandoning efforts to stop nuclear proliferation in Pakistan. Just 6 years later, the Reagan-Bush team played a huge role in making the first Islamic nuclear weapon possible. By the mid-1980s, so much money was flowing through the Pakistani ISI that the CIA did not have a handle on where it was going, according to Melvin Goodman, a former CIA analyst on the Soviet Union. Quote, "They were funding the wrong Islamic groups," unquote, said Goodman, again quoting, "and had little idea where the money was going or how it was being spent," unquote. Sarkis Sognalian, who profited from providing arms for the secret aid program, put it bluntly, quote, "As in Iraq, the U.S. did not want to get its hands dirty, so the Saudis' money and the U.S. money was handled by ISI. I can tell you that more than 3/4 of the money was skimmed off the top. What went to buy weapons for the Afghan fighters was peanuts," unquote. According to Sognalian, the funds were first laundered through various BCCI accounts before being dispersed to ISI and into an elaborate network being run by A.Q. Khan. Quote, "Khan's network was controlled by the Saudis, not by Khan and not by Pakistan," Sognalian said. "The Saudis were in on every major deal, including Iran, Libya, North Korea, and Malaysia," unquote. After 2 decades of silence on Pakistan's nuclear proliferation network, the CIA went public in 2004, taking credit for uncovering the network. After A.Q. Khan's bizarre confession, apology, and subsequent pardon, quote, "There was never any kind of authorization for these activities by the government," Khan said on Pakistani television, again quoting, "I take full responsibility for my actions and seek your pardon," unquote. The CIA claimed that it successfully exposed Pakistan's nuclear efforts. In fact, Khan's network was only the tip of a huge nuclear technology iceberg. The truth of how much the CIA and the private intelligence network knew in the 1980s and what their actual role might have been is suggested by a pair of criminal cases, one in London and one in Houston. In each case, the defendant received very kind treatment from authorities who allowed the nuclear proliferation network to continue operating. Now note, as we go into the account of Nazir Ahmed Vaid, last name V-A-I-D, that his activities were not only winked at by the private network, the Safari Club, acting as an extension of and proxy for U.S. intelligence, and one of the foundational elements of the fifth column that I've discussed so often in connection with September 11th, notice how this fellow's activities continued even after September 11th. Note also how he was able to fund some of his nuclear technology acquisition on behalf of Pakistan and the Islamic bomb through the BCCI. And as we've looked at in so many broadcasts about September 11th, the BCCI milieu is the milieu that spawned September 11th. And the degree of connection between the BCCI milieu and that of September 11th could not be exaggerated. Continuing. In June of 1984, U.S. federal agents arrested Nazir Ahmed Vaid, a 33-year-old Pakistani, as he attempted to smuggle out of Houston 50 high-speed electronic switches of a kind used to trigger nuclear bombs. At the time of the arrest, U.S. Customs agents seized several letters directly linking Vaid to S.A. Butt, B-U-T-T, the director of Pakistan's Atomic Energy Commission. Butt was already known to U.S. and European arms control officials as the key operative in Pakistan's successful attempts in Europe in the 1970s to obtain the technology and resources for the enrichment of uranium and the reprocessing of plutonium, unquote. Vaid reportedly offered to pay for the switches in gold, later determined to have been supplied by BCCI. U.S. federal officials, however, never informed the prosecutors that the letters connected Vaid to the Pakistani bomb program. Instead, a very special deal was worked out. Vaid ultimately pleaded guilty to one count of illegally attempting to export the switches, known as Krytrons, without a license. U.S. District Judge James DeAnda sentenced Vaid to 5 years probation, the minimum possible sentence. At Vaid's sentencing, both Judge DeAnda and the prosecutor agreed that Vaid was not a foreign agent. DeAnda described him as a businessman, quote, trying to expedite what he thought was a business deal, unquote. Just 3 weeks later, Vaid was deported. According to Seymour Hersh, Arnold Raphel, R-A-P-H-E-L, who served as the U.S. ambassador to Pakistan, later revealed that there had been a fix-in on the Vaid case and that the CIA had arranged for the matter to be handled quietly. Because of his conviction and deportation, Vaid was prohibited from returning to the United States. His name appears on a U.S. Bureau of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, database of banned individuals. Nevertheless, according to an ICE spokesman, Vaid has entered the country more than a half-dozen times during the past several years. By simply dropping his last name and becoming Nazir Ahmed, Vaid fraudulently obtained multiple visas from the U.S. State Department, according to ICE. And fraudulently here is in quotes, as well it should be. Note now the activities of Vaid and his associates after September 11th. During his recent visits, some after the September 11, 2001 attacks, Vaid has established, in Texas, a string of companies with foreign affiliations. 3 in particular stand out. On July 22, 2002, Vaid, using the name Nazir Ahmed, and his brother, Mohammed Iqbal Vaid, incorporated Najud Trading Incorporated and Idafa Investments Incorporated. The sole shareholder in Najud is a company of the same name based in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. The Emirates are known to have been used as a transshipment point by the Khan network. The Dubai company identifies itself as being engaged in, among other things, building service materials trading, construction materials trading, roofing materials, and accessories, unquote. The directors of the Texas company are Nazir Ahmed and Ahmed Ali, whose address is the same as that of the Dubai parent company. The sole shareholder in Idafa Investments is an Islamic investment firm of the same name based in Mumbai, India. The website for the parent company identifies it as a broad-based investment advisory and management firm that operates on Quranic principles. The founder of the Indian company is listed as Ashraf Abdul Haq Mohammadi. One of the directors of the Texas company is Ashraf Abdul Haq Mohammadi. That's M-O-H-A-M-E-D-Y. Continuing. The others are Mohammed Ashraf Abdul Haq Mohammadi, Mohammed Sikh Vaid, and, quote, Nazir Ahmed, unquote. Parenthetically, obviously this is basically pretty much the same little group of individuals, that group being about 2 people. Continuing. The Indian company's website provides a link to Islamic Quest, an organization, quote, established to present the correct position of Islam to non-Muslims, unquote. The contact person for Islamic Quest is listed as Ashraf Abdul Haq Mohammadi. Mohammed Vaid signed the incorporation papers both for Najud and Idafa on the same day, July 19, 2002, and before the same notary public. On that same day and before the same notary, Nazir Ahmed, unquote, signed the incorporation papers for yet another company, MEC Enterprises USA Incorporated. The signature above the printed words Nazir Ahmed appears to simply read Vaid, unquote. The sole shareholder in the company is MEC Engineering Networks Private Limited of Faisalabad, Pakistan. MEC Engineering is a metals machining and manufacturing company. Its many functions, unquote, as listed on its website include tanks, vessels, and shells, unquote, pharmaceutical machineries and equipment, unquote, wastewater treatment, unquote, and engineering pipeline construction, unquote. The owners of MEC Engineering are Abdul Qavi Qureshi and Abdul Majid Qureshi. The directors of the Texas subsidiary MEC Enterprises are Nazir Ahmed, unquote, and Mohammad Aslam Qureshi of Karachi. As recently revealed, Khan's middleman, BSA Tahir, helped establish a subsidiary of a Malaysian metal machining company and use it to manufacture parts for high-speed centrifuges for enriching uranium. The parts were transshipped through Tahir's Dubai-based front companies to end users such as Libya. The first known U.S. company the Vaid set up following Nazir's deportation was Finatra Communications, Incorporated. That company was incorporated by a third party, Amin M. Ali of Houston, Texas, in August of 1996. The shareholders were Mohammed Vaid, 20%, and Nazir Ahmed, unquote, parenthetically, and the senior Vaid, 80%. Both listed residential addresses in Houston. In 1999, the Vaids changed the name of the company to Finatra Group of Companies. Nazir Vaid also operates a branch of Finatra in Pakistan. A 1997 article in Pakistan and Gulf Economist refers to Nazir Ahmed Vaid, unquote, as the chief executive of Finatra's Cyber Cafe in Karachi, Pakistan, reportedly the first such establishment in that country. The parent of the Cyber Cafe is the Finatra Group of Companies, also based in Karachi. Finatra Group controls several businesses, including a web hosting service, an energy generation company, phone and cell phone rental agencies, and a prepaid calling card dealer called Finatra Communications Private Limited. In 1998, Finatra Communications signed a contract with Pakistan's official phone company, Pakistan Telecommunication Company Limited, to provide prepaid phone card service in Pakistan. The service also allows direct international dialing. All of these businesses could be useful to an intelligence service or a terrorist organization. In 2004, U.S. Customs was planning to detain Vaid on his next trip to the United States after being warned by a reporter that Vaid was traveling freely between the U.S. and Pakistan. In the fall of 2004, a U.S. Customs agent inexplicably told Vaid's son that there was a detention order out on his father. That incident raises major questions about Vaid's relationship with the United States government and about security in the Customs Service. According to an ICE spokesman, Vaid last left the United States on November 1st, 2002. More than one CIA source said that Nazir Vaid is a CIA, quote, asset, unquote. In a telephone interview, Vaid flatly denied working for U.S. or Pakistani intelligence. He also insists he is not engaged in the trade or shipment of nuclear technology. The George W. Bush administration expresses shock at the fact that Pakistan's declared Islamic The George W. Bush administration expresses shock at the fact that Pakistan's declared Islamic bomb program became just that, a pan-Islamic nuclear weapons supermarket. This is the same Bush administration that in an eerily familiar move, just 2 weeks after the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, lifted the sanctions that had been imposed by the Clinton administration on Pakistan because of its nuclear weapons activities. The Bush change was to win Islamabad's assistance in the new war in Afghanistan, the War on Terrorism, unquote. Note parenthetically, Joseph J. Trento puts the war on terrorism in quotes. Some of what you've been hearing here perhaps indicates the wry irony underlying his use of the quotes here. Continuing. This is also the same administration that publicly, at least, accepts A.Q. Khan's absurd confession that he is responsible personally and not as an agent of the Pakistani government for disseminating nuclear weapons know-how to North Korea, Iran, and Libya. The fact that the United States had protected the Islamic bomb program also emerged in the Edwin Wilson case. During the time Wilson was a fugitive, the former CIA frontman sent the Reagan White House and the CIA detailed information about the Libyan nuclear program. The memorandum sent from Wilson in Libya through his lawyers to Theodore Shackley and the National Security Advisor. Beginning again. The memorandum went from Wilson in Libya through his lawyers to Theodore Shackley and the National Security Advisor. Wilson would later say he was never asked or questioned about what he had learned about the Libyan nuclear program, unquote. A really scary passage there in the second half. Well, it all was really pretty scary and kind of depressing and more than a little infuriating. Listeners who find the recitation of the tangled name of front companies and so forth should be aware that those networks were set up precisely to be opaque and not transparent. The whole idea was basically the execution of a nuclear covert operation. So if some of that sounds complicated, undecipherable, that's what it's supposed to be. When I've got the description for the Record 524 up on the web, you'll be able to read about it so you can piece that together. Or I would recommend go out and get a copy of Prelude to Terror by Joseph J. Trento, a really important book. It'll be particularly resonant with long-time listeners to my work, people going back to the old One Step Beyond and RFA era of the 1980s will recognize the many, many, many discussions of the Edwin Wilson, Theodore Shackley, Thomas Klein's network, and their various Cuban associates, the Villaverde brothers, Rafael Chichi Quintero, and others. That is the network talked about here. And if indeed there is a smoking gun that's a mushroom cloud, as Condi Rice was talking about, unfortunately, this network, the Safari Club, one of the principal elements in the Underground Reich Fifth Column network I've spoken about so often, will be a key element in its formation. One of the things that I want to underscore here is that one should not oversimplify intelligence matters. The whole issue of undercover agents, double agents, triple agents is a complicated one. Basically, intelligence, espionage, is the art of deception. And often, who's zooming who is not the easiest thing to figure out. Often, a lot of the most skilled intelligence operatives are sociopaths of one type or another. One of the things that makes them so good at deception is basically they have no real loyalties except to themselves. Sometimes they can very effectively deceive their employer, and sometimes they switch sides. If they see the winds blowing in a different direction politically and or economically, they decide to basically go with the apparent winner. And one of the mistakes that this country has made, or at least those elements that are intent on preserving democracy, is they basically have they backed the wrong horse, so to speak. I have not got the article in front of me, but at some point in the future I will be discussing the fact that due to the enormous increase in oil prices, the Saudis are going to be increasing dramatically their purchases in foreign countries, not only the United States, but elsewhere in the United States, and they have already purchased a company called OSAN, O-S-A-N, that is one of the principal companies involved with counting the votes assembled by the Republican-controlled voting machine companies such as ES&S and Diebold. So the residua of this Safari Club are going to be increasingly involved in counting what are left of sincerely, quote, democratic, unquote, voting in the United States, that with a small d. Now, if some of the things that I talk about you've heard on this broadcast seem difficult to comprehend, if the approach is too pedantic, well, in addition to getting a hold of the book Prelude to Terror by Joseph J. Trento, which I recommend, I don't get any money from that, by the way, there will be a detailed article-length description of For the Record 524 in the For the Record section of the Spitfire website within a week or two of the airing of this broadcast. Those descriptions are long, article-length pieces of work, and that's done basically so the admittedly pedantic format of this program can become a little more accessible to listeners. Also, please get in the habit of using those descriptions, emailing them to others. There is a listener back east who is turning the descriptions into a blog spot. WFMU, the heroic sister station WFMU, is archiving the For the Record programs on Real Audio. The entire series is available on Real Audio. The last 250-plus shows are on streaming Real Audio at www.wfmu.org/Dave Emory. Older programs are available for download only. More recent shows are also available on MP3. WFMU is podcasting the For the Record shows as well. So you can have the For the Record broadcast podcast to you by WFMU. www.spitfirelist.com, the website for the CD duplication service that handles all of the work that I'm doing. There's a wealth of material there, too. In addition to the increasingly voluminous For the Record descriptions, there are descriptions of the other programs and lectures that I've done. The last several For the Record shows are available on both MP3 and Real Audio on the Spitfire website. That for download only. They're not streaming. There is a search function on the Spitfire website, so you can search for material so that you can build up your understanding of current programs by accessing some of the references in past broadcasts. There's also a link to a website maintained by listeners in the Midwest who have compiled the declassified U.S. government documents proving the Bush family's involvement with Nazi industry before, during, and after World War II. There is also the entire Martin Bormann Nazi in Exile book, a pivotally important and suppressed book available on both Adobe PDF and also on HTML. And last but certainly not least, there's a page to click on to support the work that I'm doing. If you don't like what you're hearing here, there's no better way to do something about it than support the work that I'm doing. This concludes Side 2 of For the Record program number 524, The Safari Club and the Islamic Bomb, being recorded on August 28th of the year 2005. My name's Dave Emory. Thanks for listening.